Okay, hello teachers. So it's a visual clear. All right. Hi teachers, good afternoon. So a little bit of housekeeping rules before we start. First, if you have any questions, please in section. All right. And then second thing, so we have already created a Google Drive. So it will be shared after this. Okay. Third, yeah, I think that's all. Yeah. So please, if you have any questions to ask, please ask by typing. All right. Thank you. Okay, I will start now. Hello, teachers. My name is Miss Camelia. So I have my partner here with me, Mr. Kanga. Okay, today we are going to talk about, yeah, sorry teachers, I need to share this. Okay, so we are here for the program. Okay. So today we are going to talk about the English language paper 4, which is speaking. So I will just briefly go through the overall aspects of paper 4. Okay. For part 1 and part 3, Mr. Kanga will explain it while I will explain the introduction, which is this part, as well as part 2. Okay, so just um, if you did not know, this is the seating arrangement. Okay, so as you can see, the interlocutor will be the one facing the candidate A and B, while the assessor sitting at the back will be facing candidate A and B without saying anything. So the assessor will be silent throughout the entire speaking test. Okay, so for today, because this is something that Mr. Kanga and myself we have done in school, so we find that most of our students are in this band, which is CFR level A2, B1, and B2. So if you can see the highlighted words, okay, I think it's quite clear the differences between all these users. Okay, so we'll just go through this briefly. Is that better? Sorry, teachers. It seems that we have some technical problems. Is that better? Yeah, okay. So in this CFR levels, our students tend to be within A2, B1, or B2. So for this, you can see that I've highlighted I highlighted the keywords. So in A2, the students can understand sentences and frequently use expressions, and they are very basic language level. Okay, they can communicate in simple and routine tasks and have simple and direct exchange of information. Okay, whereas in B1, B2 independent users, okay, they are able to communicate better compared to A2. So in B1, they are able to communicate on standard input on familiar matters regularly. They can deal with most situations, and they can produce simple connected text and briefly give reasons. So that will be B1. While in B2, they are able to have main ideas of complex text on both concrete and abstract topics, and then they can interact with a degree of fluency. They have some spontaneity. They can produce clear, detailed text and explain a viewpoint. All right. So next slide. Okay. So my school, we had this speaking test. We did it for our Form 5 trial. So this is what we had to score them with. Okay. So interlocutor, in our school, the interlocutor is the subject teacher. Okay. So for me, I am the interlocutor for my own class students. So this is the band score that I'm using to score them. Okay. So in my case, generally they will score between 3 to 5 because I have the good students. I have some average students, while I also have some quite weak students. So my rank is actually it's not 3 to 5. It's actually, for me, it's between 1 to 5. Only a few students that I feel they are really excellent, they can score 6. Okay, so I'm just going through really fast, yeah? Okay. This is the assessment skills for assessor. So teachers, if you can see, assessors, the teachers who are the assessors will have a harder time to score them, because as you can see, there are 3 categories here, which is the grammar part, the vocabulary part, as well as the communicative competence. Okay, so keep in mind that the assessor, even though he or she will not say anything during the exam, but he or she will have the highest marks, meaning the assessor will score a total of 18 marks compared to the interlocutor who will only score 6 marks. So the overall points, the overall total marks will be 24 marks. Okay, so you can see the scales. Teachers, if you want this, I do have the Google Drive document. It's already in the Google Drive. So after this, at the end of the lesson, we will, sorry, not lesson, at the end of the program, we will share the Google Drive with you. Okay, so before I go on, I would like to ask Mr. Kanga to continue with his part 1. Thank you.
All right, teachers, just bear with us for a minute as we set up everything here. All right, teachers, so I will be covering part 1 of paper 4, and later I will also be talking about part 3 of paper 4. But for now, let's focus on part 1. As we all know, part 1 is probably the easiest part of the speaking paper, but even here, some students tend to underperform. And I'm not just talking about the intermediate and the lower level students. Even advanced level students tend to underperform for part 1, even though they themselves know this section is very simple. So as we all are well aware, teachers, students will be asked very general questions such as the ones shown here. All right, teachers? Okay, so what we have here are two very common examples of the questions in part 1. The first one, the most basic question of all, requires students to state the name, and the second one needs them to state where they live. All right, now if I may draw your attention to the column on the left, this is how most of my lower, intermediate, and lower level students respond to the questions. As you can see, teachers, they can clearly understand the questions the interlocutor is asking them, but they tend to limit themselves to one-word responses, which are, of course, not very ideal. Even some of my more advanced level students provided very short responses during the SPM trial exam. I suppose they felt that such short and direct questions did not necessarily warrant lengthy responses, but obviously that is not true. Okay? They should never miss a chance to showcase their proficiency at every turn. So obviously it would be preferable if they could provide longer responses as shown in the second column here. Okay, the column on my right, okay, on our right. Okay. So instead of just answering, when asked, what is your name? Instead of just answering Shahid, they can perhaps mention their full name followed by what they prefer to be called. So teachers, we need to anchor this technique to a formula. Okay. So I would like to, that's what we are here for today, just to share our classroom practices. Okay, so what I would like to propose that we teach our students, okay, the intermediate and lower level students, is PAC. Okay, teachers? All right, so P stands for pronouns, A for answers, and C for conjunctions or connectors. Okay. This is something we don't necessarily need to teach to a native speaker or an advanced level student. This form of sentence construction, probably comes naturally to them. But if we are dealing with intermediate level students or lower level students, this is something they will not really be conscious of. So therefore, I think if we teach them to be more conscious of the way in which they respond to questions, even simple questions like the ones asked in part 1, trust me, teachers, I do believe it will significantly help them improve the quality of their responses. Okay, teachers, now let's look at some examples of the types of pronouns, conjunctions, and connectors that students need in order to construct a proper response for the questions in part 1. Right, so for the P or pronouns, teachers, I propose we just simply teach pupils to always start their responses with either I or my. I don't think students will need any other pronoun here, because the questions in this section are largely personal questions about students' personal lives. So I would like to think these two singular subject pronouns, I and my alone, would suffice. So now moving on to the second part of pack, A. All right, the A of course stands for answers. Okay. This one obviously depends on the question being asked. Right? For this one, even the weakest students will be able to understand, and that is why they are more than able to usually provide one-word responses. But of course, teachers, what we need to do in order to help students is we need to tell them that they need to sandwich their answers in between other words and phrases to make their response more wholesome, right? So that's basically the whole point of this pack formula, right? And last but not least, we have the C, which can either stand for conjunction or connector. Okay. This one will be a bit tricky for the lower level students because it does require a certain level of proficiency to elaborate on their answers. But nevertheless, I urge teachers to teach students about this C anyway, because it can still be useful for the slightly intermediate ones. All right, teachers? So how will this work in answering these simple questions? Let's have a look. Okay, for each question, encourage students to start their responses with a P, which is pronoun. Like for this question, what is your name? Start with my, and of course, they should know it's followed by full name is. And then only they should place the A, which stands for answers, right? Which in this case is their name. Lastly, follow it up with a C, which stands for conjunction or connector that they can think of at that moment. Like in this case of this question, they can place a but here to follow up with what they prefer to be called. Okay. So this is not set in stone, teachers. Okay, the students are allowed to be creative, to play around with this pack. Okay. The point is we want them to elaborate on their answers, not just give short one-word responses. Okay? So we can see here from them, what is your name? Is my full name is so and so, Binti so and so, but my friends call me whatever nickname it is. Okay, teachers, I hope you're with me so far. Now, if you don't mind, let's take a look at another example. Okay, this pack formula also works in more complicated questions like this one here. How do you enjoy your leisure time? Most lower level students will just simply provide a one-word response, which obviously will not give the examiners a good impression. So teachers, as demonstrated, as demonstrated here, encourage your students to start their response with a P or pronoun. All right. So the final box is how they should provide a wholesome answer. All right. So when answering the question, how do you enjoy your leisure time? Instead of just answering reading or jogging or watching movies, They can provide a more wholesome response like, I enjoy watching movies because it helps me relax. Okay, teachers? So that's PAC. P for pronoun, A for answer, and C for conjunction or connector. Okay, teachers, let's check out one more example. Here, the question is, what do you normally do after coming home from school? Okay, let's see how PAC works here. So as normal, they should start their response with the pronoun I. If they are capable, they might add the adverb usually, but the response still works without it. Okay, so the really lower level students, you don't have to teach them that if it's really tough. Okay, but then they need to add the A or answer, which in this case is do the laundry. Then they can include the C or conjunction here. Here we've used but to show a difference between what is usually done and what is the norm on certain days. So teachers, as I've mentioned earlier, teachers, this part, the C part, requires a certain level of proficiency, which can be quite taxing on the lower level students. Regardless, I think the intermediate ones can definitely do it, teachers. So let's just teach them this formula and hopefully they can make the most out of it, right? Okay, teachers, so very quickly, this PAC formula works for all the questions that are normally asked in part 1. So here are 7 of the most popular questions that I've compiled after surveying many reference books in the market. All right, but obviously, these are not set in stone. Okay? Some other questions might be asked in part 1 as well. Okay? But the point that I wish to make here is the PAC formula can be used for all these types of questions. Okay, as you can see here, I've underlined the pronouns. The answers I've left blank because, it depends on the students. And conjunctions or connectors are also answered, right? Every response is made up of these 3 elements. Okay? After teaching my intermediate and lower levels pupils this approach, I find that they somewhat understand that they are expected to provide more than just a one-word or short response. I hope everyone will find this PAC formula useful, yeah? On a side note, teachers, I browsed through multiple workbooks that are sold in the market right now, and most of them seem to have the exact same set of questions for part 1. I'm yet to confirm this, but I think the questions for this section might be somewhat fixed, but please don't take my word for it, okay? Nevertheless, I don't think there's any harm in preparing our students to answer the most common questions for this part, okay? That way, it will be a good opportunity for them to really showcase what they have and make a good impression of themselves. Okay, teachers, now, so that's all we have for part 1. I'll redirect your attention to Miss Camelia. She'll be presenting on part 2 of the speaking paper. Yeah, I'll see you in a bit, teachers.
Okay, teachers, hi, I'm back. Okay, okay. Now we're going to part 2. So part 2 is the individual long term. Okay, what do I mean by that? So as you can see, this is the process. Okay, in the beginning, the interlocutor will give the candidate A 30 seconds to prepare his or her response. So of course, by then, candidate A would have seen the question, so he or she will have to think about his or her response for 20 seconds. After that, candidate A will begin to answer a long-term question. Okay. So this long-term question will be about 1 minute. After the candidate A answer the long-term question, candidate B will be asked a brief question based on what candidate A's topic is about. Okay, so the brief response will be about 20 seconds to 30 seconds. Okay, so after that, it's vice versa. Candidate B will have his or her turn at the long-term question, which is the 1 minute one. And after that, candidate A will be asked a brief question based on what candidate B has been talking about. So it's about 20 to 30 seconds as well. Okay, so this is a rough process. Okay. So I have a few tips that I feel it works for my students because like Mr. Kanga and myself, we are teaching intermediate students, most of it, I mean both of us. So most of my students, generally, they understand. So I hope these tips will help your students as well, teachers. Okay, so in the first point here, tenses. Okay, what do I mean by tenses? Tenses here would mean um, that, you know, to ask your students to identify the type of question, the type of tenses used in the question. Usually, after like I clicked through quite a few revision books and all that, the tenses that will be used are usually past tense. However, there are certain cases where they ask about the future plans. So, in regards to that, it is uh, better, I feel, to teach the students to identify the tenses used. Okay. After that, okay, what do I mean by the flow? Okay, the flow is to follow the sequence of the questions asked. Okay, I will go through this later. I will mention this later. Okay, the third one will be the reason. Okay, reason being to ask your students to provide reasons for every answer he or she give. So let's say they have, let's say they want to say that, oh, what is your favorite movie? So my favorite movie is Transformers because. So provide a reason. After that, use sequence connectors. Okay, this one, I feel like intermediate students will be able to do it. So simple sequence connectors such as firstly, secondly, then after that. So use sequence connectors to link the ideas. Okay, and finally, I feel that this is quite important as well. To say thank you at the end of your turn. Okay. What do I mean by this is, let's say candidate A has finished his or her turn. So this will signal to the interlocutor as well as the assessor that candidate A has finished his or her response. Okay. So we'll go to the next diagram, which is the burger diagram. Okay. The burger diagram here is to help to make the responses longer. Okay. So I think teachers, you would have seen this diagram in writing, right? Okay. But I feel that for speaking, you can also use the same diagram. I feel that it helps with, you know, if you have this diagram, it helps. Okay. So let's just go through this. So the main statement will be the base of everything. So usually the statement will be from the first question itself. Okay, as I said, I will go through this later when I show you the sample question. So teacher, just bear with me. All right. The second part will be the juicy patty, which is the details. Okay. Which are the details? Sorry. Which are the details? The details will provide um, more descriptive words to make what to support the statement that you have said. Okay. So that will be the juicy patty. After that, the creamy cheese and condiments will be the examples. So again, I would highly recommend to use descriptive words for more crunch. And finally, the top bun, which is the conclusion to the whole thing. Okay, so I will illustrate this burger diagram later. Okay. So this is just another diagram to shorten it up. So just now remember what I said, the base, the point, the juicy patty will be the elaboration. So the condiments will be the example, and the conclusion, which is the top bun. All right. So remember PALPXC. Okay. So these are the sample questions that is actually used. We actually use these questions in our recent speaking test. So as you can see, remember just now I said PALPXC. Yeah. You can refer to the question here. P will be what the point was. Okay. And then elaboration would be what you did. Okay. Example will be what did you, if you enjoy yourself, why or why not. And then conclusion will be why the festival celebrations are important in Malaysia. So as you can see here, it's already following that burger diagram. Okay. So, okay, let's just go through this. So remember teachers, I did mention the tips before, right? So please tell the students when you see the question, please identify the tenses used. All right. So as you can see here, for candidate A, the tense used here is past tense. All right. Okay. So this will be the sample response for candidate A. Generally, my students, they answer in this way. Of course, they don't answer that long, but I did try to teach them to do this. Okay, so this is like a sample response, all right? So talk about a festival celebration you had recently. So what the festival was. Okay, remember what Mr. Ganga said just now regarding the pronoun, answer, conjunction, or connectors? Yeah, I am using that in this as well. So you can see the response, I, pronoun, had celebrated a festival, answer, N is the connector. Okay, so what the festival was, I had celebrated a festival recently and it was maybe Chinese New Year. What you did, so I had done many things on that day. Firstly, I had cleaned the house before 6 a.m. I'm just giving an example, I do not know for sure. Okay, so if you enjoy yourself, why or why not? Okay, I enjoyed myself because my relatives came back and we had a blast. Then why festival celebrations are important in Malaysia? So lastly, in my opinion, this is to conclude, festival celebrations are important in Malaysia because, okay, why do I bracket these words? Give two reasons if possible. Okay, for my slightly weaker students, I encourage them to give me at least one reason. But for those who are slightly better, the teacher can encourage them to give two reasons if possible. Okay, and also another tip, remember I say to say thank you. Yeah, that is all from me. Thank you, teacher. So this will signal to the interlocutor as well as the assessor that candidate A has finished his or her response. Right? Okay. Now we're going to the sample response for candidate B. So after that 1 minute response by candidate A, candidate B will have to answer a short, brief question. So sample response for candidate B, such as this. What was the last festival you had? Did you have a good time? Why? Okay, this question will not be in the exam, in the paper where the candidate can see it. This will be asked verbally by the interlocutor. Okay, so the interlocutor will ask, what was the last festival you had? Did you have a good time? Why? So candidate B will have to answer all the questions asked. So I had celebrated, let's say Deepavali, I celebrated it during November. So I had a good time because I had a lot of delicious food. Yeah. So provide at least one reason, I would say. Of course, if your students are good, go ahead, they can provide more than one reason. Okay, so again, after candidate B has done his or her response, please encourage the student to say, that is all from me, thank you, teacher. Okay. So for me in class, I tend to get my student to be more descriptive. So these are some words that I find, they like to reuse these words. So instead of using the word nice, okay, for example, you want to say, I had a nice time. So instead of saying I had a nice time, maybe the student can say I had a pleasant time. I had a lovely time. Okay, so be more descriptive. All right. Okay. So the last part for now, for me, okay. So here are a few reminders that I feel that teachers, please remember that the priority here is to answer all the questions asked. So if you were to see the sample question again just now, there are 4 points here that you have to answer, right? The students will have to answer 4 points: what the festival was, what you did, if you enjoyed yourself, why or why not, and why festival celebrations are important in Malaysia. So the priority here is to answer all 4 of the questions. Okay, try not to I feel that even for my last classes, I tell them to try to answer, even though they may not like understand the question 100%, but they did try. Okay, because what we want here, I feel, in the speaking test is for them to actually speak, so that we can grade them, right? Okay. After that, no memorization. Okay, I highly emphasize this. Do not memorize. Do not ask your students to memorize phrases or words. Words, maybe a few, maybe the um use the connectors and all that. Yes, they can remember that, they can memorize that, but not whole sentences, because why? It will sound very unnatural. Okay, and I feel like most teachers, if we are tasked to be the examiner for for speaking exam, we would know that whether this student, like, is this his or her true capabilities, is it really his uh, skill that we are talking about, or is he memorizing? Okay, so no memorization. And then remember the PLEXC. So this is to help the student to make their sentence longer. Okay, and the last point that I feel, most teachers will probably forget. Okay, non-verbal cues. Okay, what do I mean by this? Why do I put the eyes there, the beautiful eyes there? Okay, non-verbal cues will be like when you're answering a question, it's better to ask the student to, keep their posture straight, not to slouch, and then keep eye contact. Okay, because I feel that it's very important in a speaking test to have eye contact, and then don't fidget. Important thing is don't fidget. All right. Okay, that's all from me. I would pass the third part 3 discussion task to Mr. Kanga.
Okay, Deepa. I would like to elaborate very quickly on something Ms. Camilla mentioned earlier during our talk, and that is the seating arrangement, right? Just a minute, teachers. Okay, just a minute. I need to set this thing up. All right, teachers. So what you can see here is the seating arrangement that will be used uh, for parts one and two of the speaking paper, in which the candidates face the interlocutor directly, since they are, after all, communicating with the interlocutor. All right. Okay, so naturally this will be the seating arrangement, the one that you can see right here. But for part three, teachers, for part three, okay, this would be more preferable. Okay, I'm not saying that students actually have to stand up and then move their chairs. No, that's not what I mean. Okay? But what you need to understand is students will be speaking to each other. So I'm not saying students need to necessarily turn their chairs and directly face each other, but please, teachers, tell your students, especially the intermediate and lower level ones, that part three is different from parts one and two. Okay, therefore they must face each other with their eye contact on each other and not on the interlocutor. Because personally, that's what happened to me. That was one problem I faced with my lower level students. Okay. Despite having told them that they need to face their talk partners, they still faced me, the interlocutor, and refused to face their talk partners. So teachers, please stress this to your students, because the very point of part three is it is a discussion. And you cannot, I mean, think about it, you cannot engage in a proper discussion if you're not even talking to your partner. Right? Okay. All right, teachers. So Now that that's done, okay, let's get on with the actual part 3. Okay, so here's a sample question, right? This is a question that came out for the part 3 of the speaking paper during the SPM trial examination at my school. Okay. The topic was elements needed for a birthday party. And these were the 6 elements as presented in the graphic organizer. Okay. It might seem like a pretty doable topic, perhaps even a fun topic. And yes, in many ways it was. Students across the board generally found it easy and doable. But here's the problem, teachers. They sounded so unnatural. Okay, let me give you a taste of what they sounded like. I'm not sure if you other teachers will relate to this, but here we go. All right, if I can draw your attention to the first column here, the column on your left, this is the transcript of 2 of my advanced class students. That is why, if you notice, there is nothing inherently wrong with the sentence constructions, the grammar, even the vocabulary and everything is fine. I mean, after all, they are advanced level students. So they have the proficiency, but they just don't know how to articulate their ideas eloquently. And that's why you will see their constructions all just sound so cringy. Okay? They sound so wooden and stoic, as if they are reading off cue cards. Uh, Basically, one student mentions a few elements from the graphic organizer, and then the partner mentions a few more, and then they somehow finish off all and then just say thank you, teacher. All right. Um, so I think we can agree that that is not really a discussion, teachers. Huh? There needs to be, for a discussion to happen, there needs to be exchanges. There needs to be agreeing, disagreeing, seeking validation. Okay, so the one in this first column right here, it all sounds rehearsed, even though it isn't. Okay, and it doesn't flow smoothly like a natural conversation. So now let's consider this. It might seem sophisticated and almost impossible for our typical Malaysian students, especially the intermediate ones, to achieve this level of complexity in their language. But I assure you, teachers, if you observe this construction on the right closely, it is not all that sophisticated. In fact, all the responses, that's why I believe that most of our students might be able to benefit from this formula I'm about to share with you. Okay, teachers? Right. So please bear with the acronyms, teachers. This one is called COCOVA. COCO stands for connector and conjunction, V stands for validation, and A stands for agreeing. Although it could mean disagreeing, but we'll come to that later. Okay. Now, unlike part 1, where the formula was basically different word classes merged together, this one is more complex phrases and even sentences. Okay. So let's consider some of the phrases and sentences before we look at a few examples. Right? All right, so let's look at some of these connectors for COCO. Right, COCO of course means connectors and conjunctions. Right, more advanced students will be able to use longer connecting phrases like the first 5 here. Okay? But the lower level ones can settle with the one word connectors too. Okay? I don't think it will make too much of a difference, but teachers, notice that the topic is usually one that requires students' opinions. So teachers, instead of using more general connectors like the ones on the left, how about we encourage students to use phrases specifically for stating opinion? The most common ones are like, in my humble opinion, in my point of view, I would like to believe that, and so on and so forth. You can read the rest on your own. Teachers. Using these kind of phrases will significantly enhance the enhance the quality of students' responses. Okay. Lower level students might find it difficult to use them because they don't come, it doesn't come naturally to them, right? But that's fine because we can encourage them to remember as many as possible. Now, teachers, some of us might get triggered at the mere mention of the word remember or memorize. But we're not making students memorize long scripts for spotted questions. That obviously, like what Ms. Kimila said earlier, that would be dangerous. Okay, we're just telling them to remember useful phrases that they can use for any topic, any given topic will be able to utilize these phrases. Okay? So personally, I don't think that's phrases. I'm confident they will be able to use them properly in not just for the test, but in everyday life, because that's the point of teaching them English, right? So we don't just need to use them in speaking, we can also use them in writing as well. Okay? So teachers, this is the first part of COCOA, the COCO section, which stands for connectors and conjunctions. All right, now let's consider the V, which stands for validation. Okay? Basically, in order to make the discussion between students sound more natural, they need to seek their partner's approval after having made a point. Phrases they can use include like all these that you can see here. After all, this is a normal conversation, a normal discussion. Okay? We're constantly in normal everyday conversations or discussions, we're constantly making sure the people we're talking to either agrees or disagrees with us, right? So during my own students' SPM trial examination, okay, I found my students, even the advanced ones, of course, tend to overuse the first phrase. They keep on using what you think over and over at every turn. Okay, and this does not work in their favor, right? So teachers, we should expose students to a variety of such phrases, not just what do you think. Okay, there are other similar phrases like the ones shown here. If they can use a variety of them, then clearly they will sound more natural and less rehearsed. So what happens after one student has asked for validation from their partner? Okay, clearly the partner has to either agree or disagree with the student that has spoken before. And that brings us to the A, or agreeing, right? So here we have, as you can see here, a few phrases and even sentences, okay? So before the next student elaborates on another point, that student should make it clear that they agree with their partner's statement. This can be done through the phrases in red shown here. Okay? Phrases such as these can make it clear that they agree with their partner. Now teachers, perhaps if your students have the proficiency, how about you encourage them to maybe clash on two or maybe one or 2 points. Okay? That will sound more natural because it's impossible for two individuals to agree on absolutely everything, right? So I put here, if you notice, I put here use sparingly because we don't want people to disagree on every single point either. Okay, that would turn the discussion into a debate. And although I don't necessarily see how that would be wrong, I just don't think students need to burden themselves unnecessarily like that. Okay. Right. Just encourage students to agree with most of each other's points as much as possible, but maybe if they have the capacity to do so, maybe they can clash, disagree on one, maybe, if they are comfortable, right? So for advanced students who have the proficiency level, I'm confident they can make that happen. So teachers, are we clear on the different aspects of this COCOA formula? Right. Let's move on. Okay, teachers, so there will be the first section where they will discuss all the elements provided, okay? Okay, so teachers, here is one example of an exchange, okay? After a short introduction, maybe in one sentence, student A explains what a birthday is. And then they jump right in, okay? Remember, COCO comes first. So the first sentence ideally should have a connector, like first or first and foremost, since that is the first element, right? And then they go on and state the actual point before adding the C, the conjunction. Okay? In this case, it is because, which they've used to elaborate on the point that they made earlier in the sentence. Okay, teachers, pretty clear cut, right? So that's the COCO part. Then we move on to the second box, still student A, mind you, right? They would seek student B's validation by asking something like, what's your take on this? And then student B agrees, or perhaps disagrees, I don't know, okay, before repeating the process again, right? Until all the points in the graphic organizer has been completed. All right, teachers, I hope everyone is clear right now on how this process works. It's really very simple to teach, but I hope this graphic organizer up here doesn't overcomplicate things. Perhaps if we go through a couple more examples, it will be clearer, right? Okay, so here is another exchange. The conversation, the discussion continues, teachers, okay? But if you notice here, I have made the student A disagree, okay? All right, so the first sentence, of course, Coco, meaning conductor and conjunction. Then similar to what student A did just now, student B will now have to seek validation, right? Like over here, they said, what do you think? Of course, this is the most common phrase for seeking validation that we use almost every day. And once again, my students tend to overuse it, right? Try to teach students a variety of other phrases. Okay? There are more of these teachers, which I'm pretty sure you're well aware of. Right? So then it's now student A's turn to either agree or disagree. So remember, teachers, how I propose we encourage students to clash on maybe 1 or 2 points. So that's what I'm showing here. So for the point on balloons, student A here disagrees with this particular point. And so they've used the phrase, I'm not sure about that. Of course, there are multiple other phrases to express disagreement. But as I mentioned earlier, teachers, please advise students to disagree sparingly, right? I mean, we don't want to turn this discussion into a debate of sorts. Okay? And moreover, the topic will be something general and simple, not a motion, not a debate motion, right? So there will be no need to disagree more than agree. Okay, there will be no need for that. Okay? Please tell your students that, or else I fear the more advanced ones might tend to go overboard, right? So that was the case with a few of my students, right? Okay, teachers, here is one more last exchange, all right? So here, after disagreeing with student B's point, student A can start with a connecting phrase, in my opinion, which is also a very common phrase to express opinion that students tend to overuse, at least my students do, because that's the only one that they probably know, right? So teachers, please do teach them more similar phrases, right? And then student A continues with the conjunction because to justify their opinion, thus forming a full sentence. Now, he has to seek validation. And here's a phrase that is not so popular, but not completely unheard of either. Do you feel the same way? And now student B responds, yes, you're right about that. So, like I mentioned earlier, teachers, no point in debating further because as we're well aware, this is not a debate, and the faster students can come to an agreement or compromise on the points they're clashing on, the quicker they can move on to another point. Right? So are we okay, teachers? I hope it's clearer now where the connectors, conjunctions, validation, and agreement comes in COCOBA, right? Okay, teachers, so in section 2 of this part, okay, they need to agree on one similar thing. Okay, teachers, the COCOBA can come into play here as well, all right? So which one is the most important element for celebrating a birthday party? That is the question that the teacher, the interlocutor will ask once the candidates have discussed all the points in the graphic organizer. All right. So it follows the same formula. Okay, COCOBA. All right. My personal opinion. Okay, for the answer for this question. All right. Student A says guests are the most important element for a birthday party. And then he or she asks student B, would you agree? Okay. Siti or Ain, whatever student B's name is. And then student B goes on and agrees. We are of one mind on that. Remember, they have to agree. Here, no debating in this section. All right? Okay. And then she can go on and state her COCO, her personal opinion, the phrase to state personal opinion. I hold the view that guests are important because blah, blah, blah. All right? And then they can go on and ask, do you feel the same way? Okay, seeking validation, right? And student A then says, I couldn't have said it better myself. Or any phrase to agree, right? And thus, that would end the second section of the part 3, right? But they're not done yet. Okay, teachers, they're not done yet. Okay, so section 3, final part of the speaking paper is where they will discuss a separate but somewhat related question. So in the case of the birthday party question that we're talking about right now, okay, they will ask, okay, in what ways does a celebration become a meaningful one to us? So teachers, here at this point, it stops becoming a discussion between candidates A and B. Now they turn and face the interlocutor, right? Okay, so there will be no need for validation and agreeing because there's no longer any exchanges, right? We are talking only to the interlocutor, right? So they could start again like with a connector. In my opinion, or it's my view that a celebration is meaningful when they give a reason, because, okay, use the conjunction because is a really important conjunction that you need to know, right? Because, and then they provide a reason for the answer. Okay, so this more or less follows the pack that we learned in for part 1, doesn't it? All right. Okay, teachers, I believe that we're done. We're almost done. Okay, so here, let's just recap very quickly what we have done for this cocoa bar. All right. So remember, teachers, first they are the connectors and conjunctions. That is the cocoa, right? Then there is the validation, and also then there is finally the agreeing or disagreeing. Teachers, let me just remind you one very last time. Okay, I've underlined two sentences here, right? Two phrases, if you notice. First one is what do you think? The next one is I strongly agree. Because once I taught this formula to my students, my advanced students, in fact, okay, they tend to overuse these two sentences. Okay? What do you think? And I strongly agree. Okay, I believe teachers, you need to teach them a variety of these phrases, so expose them to a wider vocabulary choice. Okay, teachers. All right, that and I believe we are done, teachers. I believe we are done for the day. All right. So, but teachers, just a one word of reminder. All right. Something here that I need to tell you. Okay. So that's all we have for you today, right? I apologize if we could not answer any of your questions, but anyway, if anyone wants these slides and any other paper 4 related documents, there is a Google Drive link provided, okay, in the Facebook page. Okay, teachers. So anyone can easily access them, right? You can easily access them for your own convenience through the Facebook link. But before we end our session, teachers, just a kind reminder, paper 4 will take place from the 22nd to the 24th of February, I believe. Yeah, okay. That's roughly 1 month away. So there is still time, although it's very limited. That is why our sharing session today is very exam oriented. I apologize for that. Okay, but we're well aware of this. Nevertheless, we're all still learning clearly. But this paper 4, as you can see, is very different from the internal oral test that we used to do for our ULBS last year, right? This is the first time we're implementing this new CEFR aligned KSSN format. So all we can do is hope for the best, okay, teachers? Right. On behalf of the organizers and my fellow presenters, I thank you all for being with us today, and I think we've all learned a lot, and hopefully we'll meet again for another session. Okay. Goodbye, and thank you, teachers.